You know the driver in that car. The son of a legend himself, Dale Earnhardt Jr. You also know that he was thankfully unharmed despite how bad this fire looks. And you also know that this race was a bust. What some of you may not know is that a man who was a little bit of a legend in his own right lost his opportunity to drive one of the most important races of his career because of this freak fire. That man is Boris Said. Boris was born on September 18th, 1962, in the Bronx. Growing up without much of a father figure, he quickly became a little bit wayward. He'd moved to Long Island to live with his mother, who raced sports cars. Later in his life, the old man tried to con him on the basis of quote-unquote helping his racing career, which he thankfully turned down after realizing the extent of the ploy. As a kid, he'd work at a motorcycle shop, where his bosses and coworkers effectively became his surrogate parents, making sure he stayed on the straight and narrow. Before this, he hung around the wrong types of folk, going on joyrides. Around the age of 12, he'd be busted for stealing wheels off a car at a car dealership after being ratted out. He'd work 40 to 50 hours a week, despite still being have to attend high school, but it paid off. He had worked his way up from putting bikes together, all the way to becoming the youngest Honda motorcycle franchise dealer at the age of 21. Despite being able to afford to run his own franchise, he was still unable to get the credit lines needed for both floor planning and actually start his racing career. A local Ford dealer, John McClane, no relation to the skyscraper hero from Die Hard, unfortunately, was a customer of his, buying motocross parts for his kid. He'd agreed to be part owner in Boris's franchise, but only on paper, to help him get it. He'd receive a few dirt bikes in return for his help, among which was a 1985 Honda CR500 and a Honda CR250. Immediately, he was hooked. All he ever thought about from that day forward was car racing. 6 months later, he would take lessons at Skip Barber. Many of you watching this no doubt have racing ambitions of your own. Perhaps you want to be the next open-wheel, single-seater superstar, make it in Formula Fords or Formula Vs. Maybe you want to be the next local short-track champ. Or maybe you want to be the best damn dirt slinger in rally or rallycross. Regardless of your preferred discipline of driving, there are steps you have to take to get there. And it's best to start as early as you can do. Boris was told the same thing years ago, and with the same caveat from one of the instructors. OSB, he began. Other sports beckon. You're too damn old, you haven't got any money, and you haven't got any talent. Boris would not take this laying down and pressed on. While the instructor wasn't much position to talk, he nonetheless had a point. Boris, however, began scheming ways to get around this hurdle. A year later, he'd sell his business to buy a car. Damned if he did, damned if he didn't, he decided to press on to race regardless. His first ride was an old Fox body Mustang, and he would get his money's worth out of that thing.
Boris Said is a 28-year-old businessman from near New York City, has long curly locks. He's running the most unlikely looking race car, I think, in the field today.
Yeah, and it really strange. One of the few Ford Mustangs out here today, but Boris is giving it the ride of his life. You can see he's throwing this car around. He tries hard no matter what he's in.
Right now, Boris Said, who comes from a racing family, although he didn't realize that until late in life, is running in 9th position. It's challenging, but not for the lead. Oh, we've got another crash.
That's Boris.
Appears to be the same corner. What's going on?
That definitely is the same corner. I don't know, maybe Boris, at least he's trying to drive out of it, but he thumped those tires as well.
He went in hard on the right side, and what saved him, Bill, is that he bounced off the tires because he hit him broadside.
That's right. And we're going to get a shot of his right front wheel, and maybe we can tell if he's damaged the suspension. It doesn't appear it because he's going... No, as we're looking at it, you can see the wheel itself is still fairly straight up and down. There's nothing really rubbing, and the car looks okay. So I think he was lucky. Unlucky and lucky at the same time.
Aggressive, Boris Said. An incident like that is not going to deter him from his appointed task.
Oh, shoot, he probably thought that was fun. He'd like to go do it again.
It is amazing that he got away from this and is able to run. You see him out of control already.
Yeah, right sideways and trying to keep this car in a long slide. Once again, look at this. Tires are locked up. Bang, hits the car is right off the ground. My goodness, did he ever slam that barrier.
Comes down on all four wheels, but you also see an example of when you're going downhill and you're out of control and you're in a slide, there is very little that you can do to save the car. Boris decided to bring it in, have the crew check it over. If I know Boris, he wants to go back out. R.K. Smith, obviously, as Bill pointed out, in good shape. R.K.'s day is done, but Boris said looks like he is indeed ready to go back out. You're going to have the easy chair here for the next couple minutes. We'll be back after this. Oh, and we have a very heavily smoking car. We cannot see who it is through the trees and bushes there. Is he out of control? He makes the turn. That is a left turn. No, now he's coming to a stop. That's Boris. Our old friend Boris said we saw him crash very hard in turn number 6. Heavy smoke inside that car. He looks like he's trying to get out. Maybe it's on fire, but no, he keeps moving, Bill. I think he's on buckle and wants to go back to the pits.
Well, look at his head coming out the window here. The smoke
goodness.
is so bad, he couldn't even see through the windshield. And he must have undone his seatbelt and he's hanging out.
Boris said from Darien, Connecticut, is using a very unorthodox driving style to get back to the pits. Lots of heavy smoke. You can see the cockpit is filled. It must be very gaseous on the inside.
Oh, this is an incredible amount of smoke. And it's also dangerous for cars following him. Now, they can't tell what the heck is up in front of them.
Bill, any idea what might be wrong with that car causing so much internal cockpit smoke?
I don't know. It has to be some sort of a major failure, like an oil cooler that is dumping huge quantities of oil onto maybe the red-hot exhaust system.
This guy is almost at top speed, and I doubt that he's had an opportunity really to refasten the 5-point safety harness system that holds him in the car. See the corner workers turning away. They don't have anything to do with that.
No, they're ready to run.
And his crew is also ready to run to get to work. You can hear Boris clunking in. Now, this is a moment in every race where you have the potential of a difference of opinion between driver who wants to race and car owner and crew chief will say, no, the day is over.
Stood out the window to get back, but I mean, we were up against a pretty expensive field, and it's the first time we even turned the wheel on the car 2 days ago, the Ford, and it was looking real good until our motor went. For a Mustang, that thing was really cruising. Thank you. We'll be back.
And just like that, he was off to the races, taking part in SCCA road course events wherever he could, driving the doors off of it. The instructor, meanwhile, who told him he was too late to start, was still back in Connecticut, not racing even once a week to this day. Before his first stint, he ran into a little bit of serendipity in the form of a BF Goodrich truck. He met the fella at the hauler, where he was encouraged to swap his current set of tires for race tires. "No, man," he called back. "They're good for hundreds of thousands of miles. It's got tires on it already. What do you need new tires for?" Believing that the guy was a con man also, ignored his advice. Despite being on street tires, he'd be second fastest on the practice sheet. Though, to little surprise, his tires were in complete ruins. Sure enough, he'd capitulate and buy his first ever set of race rubber from them. They'd in turn also become a sponsor, and a year after that would even help him procure a ride, in which he'd proceed to win the national championship in 1988, winning 3 races in a row. The amassment of talent even surprises Boris. He cites his motorcycle background as a helping hand in initial success. "If you saw me dance at a bar, even sober, you'd think I'm wasted," he'd say. "But I don't know, man, they violate my footwork from in-car cameras, and meanwhile I'm driving and I'm just going on and not even thinking about it. I don't even know where that comes from either." Before nabbing the '88 championship, he'd only done 1 regional race before he could attempt national race events. He would be barred from the entry to the Lime Rock race, but 2 weeks later he would attempt the race at Summit Point, which was a national event. His solution? Grab the SCCA magazine, copy the race dates and track names of at least 4 races, sign off on them. He showed it, he was questioned, unsurprisingly, but would manage to sell them on the con, and they approved his national license and let him race. When he learned that the next race was a 6-hour stint at Atlanta, he came up with an absolute hack job of a fuel system to make the endurance run. He also rode in at least 4 national sanctioned races, and basically just got some random karting kid to be his co-driver, since the race required 2 drivers to participate. BF Goodrich naturally got curious as to why he'd only brought 1 tire set. When he realized they'd never make the distance, he went right over behind the wall, right to their hauler, and changed all the tires on the 1 wheel set that he had, by himself. That's right, A one-man pit stop. Eat your heart out, Morgan Shepherd. After managing to get back on track, and with only 1 hour left to go, Boris is black flagged for trying to go the full distance by himself. Pulling off, he darts out of the car, somehow not snagging his big wig on the way out, runs over to beg and plead with the chief steward to allow him to finish the race. He also capitulates after 15 minutes, allows him to do so, and back out he goes to nab the checkered. Quite the first Pro Series start. At the end of the year, actually making sure to prepare this time, prep for the race at Sebring. He and his two buds decided to rent a Mustang GT from Hertz, packed it with 2 spare wheels, and had developed a unique strategy for pit stops, to say the least. While they would fuel up, Boris would jump out, grab a T-handle, get the wheels loose, run over to the other side to jack it up, and pull the tires off, and vice versa. On the final stop of the race, it came to Boris's attention that Ford needed him to finish in the top 10 to get the manufacturer's championship that year. As Boris was getting ready to unbuckle, Steve Saleen, the mastermind behind supercars like the Saleen S7 and some of the Trans Am Fords of the era, and tuned Mustangs for the general public, had sent over his crewmates with air guns and actual pit stop gear and equipment to get him back in the running. Despite being a disqualification risk if he did so, he decided to finish the race by himself without the driver swap from the Saleen camp. Fortunately for both Boris and Ford, they weren't protested by Porsche and the rest of the field, and he had completed the win for the manufacturer's championship in doing so. What a remarkable first year of competition. To finish out the 80s, he'd run the Corvette showroom GT class, eventually winning at least once against the stiff opposition. Come the 90s, though, he'd get a chance to run at Daytona for Kim Baker. As great as this car was, that's not what had caught his eye. What got his attention was 2 German fellas who were building a Callaway Corvette race car to race in Europe. Using his usual smooth-talking methods, and taking them for dinner, to no avail. They had already a driver lined up for their attempt. Giving up, decides to sideline it after a little while. A couple months later, however, Reeves Callaway himself rings Boris up at 5 in the morning. He's asked to replace the current driver who broke his hand exiting a rental car. "They're waiting for you to go race in Belgium," Callaway said. "Do you have any idea how much a ticket would cost? Just see if you can get a flight." After fumbling around, Boris replies, "Yeah, I can get a flight out by about 8 a.m. After explaining the itinerary and the hefty sum it would cost, Callaway simply replies, "Alright, go and do it." He would roll out of bed, quickly explain to his girlfriend that he'd be leaving for Europe, wished each other well, and off he went. After finally landing in Belgium, he would be flagged down by one of the car owners at the airport, who did not speak much English. Reading the sign he'd been flagged down with, got the message and followed into the car, and drove off. After making a quick pit stop along the way to get a nice Dagwood sandwich, he'd make it to the track to begin his quali stint, and mustered a respectable 13th. Especially impressed was the Europeans, who never seemed to take the Corvette seriously. To them, it was nothing more than a boulevard cruiser, hardly a serious racing car, especially compared to the likes of Porsche and the other Euro competition in their eyes. It wasn't the best part of his weekend, though, as a crowd of people caught his eye. His team bosses were muttering something about a Schumacher being the center of attention. As it turns out, it was none other than Michael Schumacher himself, who was there that day to watch his son, Ralph, turn laps in the lower Formula Car series. Boris's same bosses would bring him to Schumacher's attention, saying something along the lines of "an American has come to their track to race." Michael obliged a warm welcome for a private, cordial sit-down. Pretty special. The Boris said that we'd come to know and love would get a start in NASCAR's Truck Series, then called the Craftsman Truck Series, in 1995, and went to go racing for Irvin Simo in the number 4 Ford F-150. The deal came about following Mark Simo, the CEO of No Fear, wanting to expand from sports car racing into NASCAR. It just so happened that this was the first year of Truck Series competition, making him one of the first team owners to be on the ground floor. He'd partner up with Ernie Irvin, and would call up Boris Said, who also happened to be one of the co-founders of No Fear, and asked if he could manage the team. Eventually, however, he'd step out of the office and into the driver's seat again, to turn laps for a test run at Martinsville. not quite used to the way a big truck with tire stagger drove on a flat oval track, was hoping that his typical road course sports car driving style would be the best way to get around it. Ernie would try to flag him down, as he didn't have a radio, but eventually he'd go as far as to lay down the track to get him to eventually stop. When Boris finally pulled over, he explained to him how he was overdriving the car, the intricacies of stock car racing, and how to actually run the track properly. His first race attempt would be that same year at Sears Point, where he would only manage 2 laps before the engine had expired. The next year, he'd be tapped to try again, this time joining alongside a new teammate, 1988 Artgo and 1995 ASA champ Brian Refner. Boris, despite having raced actual sports car endurance races, was exhausted by the end of the race, and finished 16th. Brian, meanwhile, would go on to finish 6th, and would nab that year's Rookie of the Year honors. Now with their feet firmly planted in the series, Boris would commit to 2 full seasons of competition, starting in '97. Now driving the number 44 F-150, things would go off to a great start, with a 4th place finish at New Hampshire, a 2nd place finish at Texas, and a 9th at Louisville, to make up for last year's attempt. This momentum, however, would come to an abrupt halt after an incident between Rich Bickle and Sed at Sears Point.
Slowly around corner number 11, and Resendiz has made for some slow starts here recently.
He once again brings him down very, very slowly. Ruttman is trying to get a run. Right now, Ruttman he'll stand on trying to get a run on Resendiz, but now Resendiz gets him brake checking, and then he nails the gas. Good move by Resendiz.
Uh-oh, but he's bunched him up behind. Look at this, they're 3 wide going for 1. Oh, and Resendiz gets off course.
He's in the dirt.
Whoa.
If he comes out of this, and the 17 and the 44 goes straight.
Bickle and Sed both get off course, and Bickle came very close to running into that tire barrier, but didn't, and they're still 3 wide.
He just knocks Sed out of the way, and he continues on his lane.
Oh, man. That was great stuff.
And Boris is now trying to get back on the racetrack, and he does continue on, but he will drop back to the last of the cars on the lead lap, probably back to 19th or 20th.
Well, let's take a look at that restart again, Benny.
This is wild. We see the 55 truck. He's down to the inside. And look at them. They're about 4 abreast. And Boris Sed just drives on in there. Ruttman gets away, but he goes in up into turn 2 on the inside of the 17 truck. Watch him come uphill. Watches the 17 and the 44. They just go in the corner, and Boris just kind of moves them out of the way. But the tires get locked up, and neither one can turn the steering wheel. Now several cars go by and puts him back, and when Rich Bickle gets the 17 truck going, the next time they get their corner, he just don't let the 44 in.
Right here.
Ever see Boris? He goes down through the Toolies.
Yep. But he got back on course, so all is not well, however, with Boris Sed, and that's a shame, too, because he
Had a great run going. He is very, very slow.
Yep, he's up through the S's at a very reduced rate of speed, and so Boris is just trying to get back to the pits. Corner number 7. Oh, and there goes Rich Bickle up the dirt bank. Who hit him? Oh, and Resendiz has crashed the leader. Oh my gosh.
NASCAR would fine Boris $5,000 in fines, and would put both of them on probation until the rest of the season. Despite the probation, however, he'd still go on to finish 16th in points, and Rich Bickle would go on to finish 2nd, just behind Jack Sprague. Going into '98, he'd restart his momentum again, this time with a 3rd place finish at the Glen, and an 8th at Fontana, and nabbing a pole position at Topeka. Finally, he'd get his first win in the series at Sears Point.
Boris, of course, connected with no fear. Interesting mix of people in that team. They've dominated here today. Finally going to pay off for them. The Sauter-Norrick battle continuing here.
7th and 8th positions. A great run for Lance Norrick. Even if Jay Sauter even gets by, it's still a great run.
For him to finish top 10 today is very impressive indeed. Lance Norrick came from 28th starting spot with a combination of smart driving and good pit work. Down for the final time into the heartbreaking section of the racetrack, Boris Sed makes the turn and heads for home. The checkered flag awaits. It is over, and Boris has won it, and the battle will be for second spot. Bliss, I believe, is going to be able to hold off Reigns. We'll take a look. Yeah, Tony couldn't get close to him. A couple of 3 truck lengths, the difference there.
How about you guys?
Big day for Boris. 9 different winners in a row coming into this event. He becomes the 10th. That is the record.
Boris makes it look easy, dare I say, as smooth as Dave Despain's commentary there. His next best finish would be 7th at Phoenix, and would close out the year at 21st in points. His next step up came from a phone call from none other than Jimmy Spencer, who by this point decided to be a car owner / driver in the Busch Series, bushwhacking alongside his current Cup Series schedule, driving the number 23 for Travis Carter. He'd asked Boris to fill a last-minute seat in his number 12 Zippo Chevrolet, as Ron Fellows, the Canadian road ringer, had agreed to drive for Spencer a week prior, but had made the jump to Joe Nemechek's 87 car at the very last minute. Boris agreed, and despite having never driven a Busch car before in his life, put the car on pole. Despite this effort, however, Boris would go on to finish 40th after his engine blew up at lap 30, and Ron Fellows would go on to win that race. While waiting for a flight to get to a BMW race in Canada, it would be Jimmy Spencer's Winston Cup car owner, Travis Carter, that'd ring him up next. Travis, in his thick southern drawl, explained to him that he had done banged his head up good, following an incident in Indianapolis, and that he needed his help to practice the car, qualify it, and even begin the race at the Glen. After a quick visit to the U.S. Air Desk, he agreed to meet him at Charlotte by 4 p.m. Worried he'd catch flack for dipping out of that weekend's BMW race, he was relieved to find that they weren't miffed in the slightest, and even wished him well. Arriving at the shop, however, he was unable to answer the crew chief's questions. "What type of track bar do you like on it?" "Well, I tell you, man, I've got no idea. I've never driven one of these before." "What sort of caster do you want?" "Like I said, man, I've got no idea. I've never driven one of these before." Despite the car setup woes, he'd be 3rd fastest in practice and would even qualify 5th. While his truck win and Busch race pole position, that put people on notice, it was his weekend's effort that really put Boris on the map. And sure enough, he became the road course guy on everybody's speed dial.
Awfully tough on a road course. All right. Who is this guy? He's got Jimmy Spencer's driving suit on. You're not Jimmy Spencer. You're an imposter. Who are you?
No, I'm Boris said. I'm just filling in for Jimmy because he's a little injured from last week.
I recognize you from the truck race yesterday. When are you going to get in?
Hopefully it'll be an early yellow and we'll be able to make the switch and be able to do a good job for Travis Carter and the Ford Taurus and Winston.
I'll tell you what, knows this joint like the back of his hand, qualified that car 5th. Watch him once he gets in the 23 for Jimmy Spencer. Well, we did it. We used up all the time for our television show. All that remains is to remind the boys that they should save the tire, stretch the fuel, and stay on the road. If you could do that and you're good enough to get around Gordon and Fellows, you could win this thing.
His next Cup Series phone call came from Ed Wood of the Wood Brothers, asking if he could mentor Elliot Saddler at Sears Point. Doing some lead follow practice, racecraft, and a golf trip, after 2 days of training him up, Ed thanked him for his time and assistance, asking him how much he owed him. "Nah, don't even worry about that mess. You've covered my expenses, so you've already paid me." Still insisting, Boris declined again. 10 days later, he'd receive a sizable check in the mail for his effort regardless. The Wood brothers must have told the entire Cup garage, because not long after that, he gets a call from Ty Norris. It'd be his biggest deal to date, with the request coming from the Intimidator himself, asking Boris to teach his son, Dale Jr., how to turn laps at Sears Point. Arriving at the track to meet the team, sees Tony Uri and the other guys keep busy with engine and suspension work. Their engine builder points Boris to Jr.'s hauler and suggests that he go up and meet him. He woke him up and greeted him, and any preconceived notion that he had suspected of him maybe being a bit of a spoiled rich kid was shattered immediately, and they got along like a house on fire after that. Finally getting in the car, he put on some quick laps, some adjustments were made to make it even faster still, and he'd be invited to dinner with Tony, Jr., and the rest of the team that night. Boris had briefly crossed paths with the Intimidator in the past, as the same year that he filled in for Jimmy Spencer at the Glen, he'd been caught out by a booming voice behind him during driver intros. "So, how's Boris gonna run today?" Boris was caught out by this. Shit, he even knows my name. turns around and says, "Well, I just hope to stay on track, I guess." Nah, you'll do fine. You'll be alright around here. The next year, Boris had passed him again in the garage area at the Glen during testing sessions. "Hey, Sid," he'd call out to him. "Damn thing's running like hot shit. Why don't you go in there and turn a few laps in her?" Stunned, all he could do was nod and followed Earnhardt to the car. Incredible. Just a year prior, he was helping Junior's Busch effort, and now he was going to drive the black number 3. Incredible. Getting comfortable proved to be a bit of a challenge at first, as it wasn't just difficult because of the 7-time champ staring at him with the shades on, but because of the way he sat in the car. Dale's seating position was leaned back, not unlike that of a lazy boy, and Dale got concerned about him being uncomfortable and noticed the ways his knees were positioned. Boris would reassure him, though, looking right back at him and saying, "I'll tell you one thing's for sure, though. Say what you will about how the car runs, but I feel like an absolute badass right now." After running some laps, Boris eventually pulled in. Dale leaned in and asked, "Well, how's she going on, then?" "To be honest with you, Dale, it's pretty damn awful." "Come with me to the holler." Waves him over. Waiting for them was Kevin Hamlin, Big E's crew chief at the time. "First off, you didn't do something about that brake pedal. You need like a smaller master cylinder or something. It's like pushing a damn rock. It sucks." Dale chimes in. "See? Damn it, I told them at Sears Point and done wore my leg out. They don't listen." Boris was a little surprised. How the hell did they not listen to their own driver's input on that, especially that of Earnhardt's? Boris would later provide some advice on what they should do, more or less, for front spring rates, how much rear sway bar they'd probably need, and Dale simply chimes in again with, "Hamlin, change it all. Let me know when y'all are done." Now they're about on the same level as friendship and racing relationships, Dale offers to fix him something to eat. "Yeah, man, give me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Cut the crust off it. Hurry it up." Meaning it jokingly. Dale didn't say a word to him, and now Boris was terrified, thinking he just crossed the Intimidator. But he sat there and waited, with no exit out anyways. Dale comes back with his PB&J, but with the crust still on it. "Come on, Dale, you didn't cut the crust off it." Nah, man, that there makes your hair curly. I don't want to ruin y'all's look." After they were done eating, Earnhardt offered to give him a signed hat. "Nah, I don't wear hats, man." "Yeah, if I had hair like yours, I don't think I would either." And gave him that signature smile. By 2004, Dale Jr. and Boris had especially become great friends, maybe even the best of friends. Jr. had run the Corvette back in 01 and was offered to ride again in 04, and was even allowed to pick who he wanted as a teammate. Naturally, his first car was Boris, who had tried tests with them previously, and as mentioned before, had raced Corvette spec cars in the past, and was more than delighted to sign up. While he wasn't in it for the money, the team had explained to him that drivers don't typically make much of the merchandise. Jokingly, he replied, No, I want the same die-cast deal he's got or I'm out." Sure enough, they did, not realizing that he was kidding. The race would be held during the Cup Series off weekend, which was unusual for Junior back then, as off weekends usually meant party time and not additional race time. Practice initially went without much of a hitch. Strategy was being developed as the cars turned laps, figuring out fuel windows and such, whereas secondary practice showed trouble with the fuel system in Junior's car, due to delamination from the ethanol mixture eating away at the rubber seals. After being taken out and replaced, it'd be good to go the following race morning. Warm-up would begin at 9 a.m., and Junior would proceed to putter around track to get familiar. We all know what happens next.
This is a Speed News special report.
Hello, everyone. We apologize for the introduction or the interruption to our programming. I'm Bob Varsha in our Speed Channel studios in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a live news update. NASCAR star Dale Earnhardt Jr. suffered what we are told are minor injuries in a frightening crash and fire this morning during practice for today's American Le Mans Series Grand Prix of Sonoma at Infineon Raceway in Sonoma, California. Earnhardt was scheduled to drive in a single appearance in the Sports Car Series on this off weekend on the NASCAR Nextel Cup schedule, sharing a GTS Class factory Corvette with road racing veteran Boris Said. Now, we do have pictures from Sonoma. Second yellow car in line disappearing behind the wall. Earnhardt apparently lost traction and spun hard into the concrete with the back of the car first. As it came to a stop on track, it burst into flames. Apparently, the fuel cell or the connectors to that cell were compromised. You see a large amount of fuel on the ground. From on board the car, here's the impact. You'll also see a shot from inside the car as Earnhardt was apparently dazed in the impact. And although it's rather frightening to look at, you'll see that he immediately started to get himself out of the car as the flagging crews brought the session to a halt and got out the fire extinguishers. Now keep in mind, this is not a full-bodied car like the Nextel Cup car he's used to driving in NASCAR. These factory Corvettes use a lot of exotic materials, including carbon fiber, Kevlar, fiberglass, and so forth. There is Earnhardt being attended to by the fire crews at the back of the truck. He appeared to be dazed, and it was decided to put him on a stretcher and airlift him to the University Hospital at the University of California at Davis. There you see what the fire did to the car, apparently totally destroyed. Although Earnhardt was able to speak to the rescuers at the scene, he was put on a stretcher, loaded in an ambulance, and taken to the helipad at Infineon Raceway. There you see him being stabilized on the stretcher and moving around. He was put on the helicopter, taken to Davis, where it was reported that he suffered a minor injury to his knee and some minor burns. That's our latest information from an American Le Mans Series spokesperson.
Boris would continue to stay with them all the way to the infield care center, and whilst the rest of the team was told to stay out of the way of the doctors, he insisted on staying. Junior was eventually airlifted, and Boris wouldn't be allowed to see him at the hospital for the time being. Boris could rest easy knowing it at least wasn't life-threatening, as he had much thought was the case with the initial perspective of the accident. The worst of the injuries just turned out to be a burn at the top of his left thigh, causing massive blisters. Despite this, and after 3 weeks of rehabilitation, Dale would link up again with Boris to discuss what was and what could have been, and even after the accident, felt very happy about being a part of such a cool car development. The only regret, if any, is that he never really got to show what he could really do. Boris had also been running in the Rolex 24-Hour Series, getting the class championship that year, which hopefully made up for his Corvette attempt. In 2005, he'd follow that up with winning the prestigious 24 Hours of the Nurburgring and an M3 GTR. And then a year later, seemingly not content with just winning the big-ticket event at the Nurburgring, he'd win the pole at the July race at Daytona. This was an especially impressive effort to onlookers, who would expect him to have just been a field filler. The car was originally Greg Biffle's from his time at Roush. Jack was the one who encouraged Boris to start his own Cup program. What do I even know about running Cup cars? Tell you what, Jack began. Just get it going, get some money together, and I'll even give you the whole damn black book. Setups, everything. You name it, you got it. I'll help you. The race attempt, however, would somewhat take the shine off of it, as even things like oil changes, shock replacements, all had to be done during pit cycles. Eventually, despite being on older rubber, with about 20 or less laps to go, they had opted to stay out and keep it wide open. I guess Jimmy had rubbed on him a little bit.
Because that's Boris said. No fear. No fear. I don't think he's nervous. He isn't. The car might be.
Last week at Infineon Raceway, the Dodge Safari 350, those two got into a bit of a shoving match, and Tony moved Boris out of the way because he didn't like the way Boris passed him earlier.
That's why Tony thinks Boris is nervous. He looks back and sees who's behind him.
I was going to tell you, if you want to talk about no fear, that kid back there in third, Kyle Busch in that 5, and he has 4 fresh tires too, and he is hungry to win a race. It's going to get exciting. Remember what I always tell you? You better reach up there and pull those belt tights one more time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Casey Mears 4th, Kurt Busch 5th, Jamie McMurray 6th. They will green flag this race with 3 laps to go. Now, they were telling Boris Said that Tony Stewart was laying back. I don't know. Stewart's got to go away to catch Boris Said now.
That's going to be borderline on that 38 car. He was definitely below the yellow line.
Below the yellow line. He would like to give that spot back, Larry, but he can't.
No, they're breathing down his neck.
Boris Said comes off turn 2 with a big lead, but that's not good.
If somebody jumps, now here you go. This is what's good right here. If these guys behind you will start racing.
But I guarantee you, Tony Stewart in that 20 car, he knows he can't get far off the bottom, but he's going to have to go to the top if he wants to go around Boris Said. Boris puts the block on him. There comes Kyle Busch in the 5 to the bottom. He's going to push Boris.
2 laps to go.
Now here's where Boris might be a little bit nervous.
Said and Stewart side by side. Stewart has help.
2 to go.
How would you like to be at least turning off into the infield right down there, but you run 190 mile an hour? You can't. got his hands full. There's no question about that. That car, we know, it's all over the place.
But here comes Kyle Busch's brother, Kurt Busch, up there to push his brother, the 5-car, Kyle.
Watch Boris's car. He just wants to whale his walk up the racetrack with it. He just takes it. He doesn't need anybody up behind him.
Well, blood is thicker than water, but most brothers in racing would rather beat their own brother than anybody else. How about the Busch brothers?
Well, we're going to find out here, boys. It's one to go, and the Busch boys are in hot pursuit.
And here comes Matt Kenseth in that 17 car on the high side. He's getting help from his teammate, McMurray, in the 26.
Kenseth has never won here, but he's taking the long way around on the outside.
Now just remember, it gets really tense. Coming down the back right here, you start blocking in turn 3. Caution is out.
Caution is out. Will we go to overtime or will the checkered flag wave?
That's it. We were in a white flag lap.
We took the white flag. We took the white flag.
The field is frozen at the moment of caution. The yellow flag waves as they come toward the finish line. Tony Stewart and the Home Depot Chevrolet will score the second win of 2006 and the 26th career victory for Stewart.
By April of 2009, Boris said would once again attempt to race Corvettes, this time not with GM backing. He'd race for LG Motorsports, driving a C6R at Long Beach. Putting on a clinic all day, would find himself on the receiving end of a fire not unlike that of Dale Jr.'s in 2004, this time spurned on by an accident between him and a Letterman Rahal factory BMW dooring him on corner entry. Despite the car burning up, he'd moved down the track as if not to block the course, held his breath, and jumped out. As he pulled his fire suit off, it looked as though his skin was steaming. He denied the hospital ride, took his car home from the beach, and as he started to pull up home, his face and head swelled up. It would take him 2 to 3 weeks to fully recover. By 2010, Boris would be called up again to give a helping hand at Hendrick for, guess who, Dale Jr., who were still figuring out ways to get these COT cars to get even faster on road courses. That same year, Boris would finally get a win for the first time, and so far the only time, in the Xfinity Series, then called the Nationwide Series, putting on one hell of a show.
Some of the others around him, all except that 32. We know he's got enough gasoline to go to the finish. Gordon, Boris said, Pappas, Villeneuve coming to the beginning of a green-white checker finish at Montreal. Who's going to get the trophy? Pappas diving to the inside, 3 wide to the corner. Contact there. Look at the scramble. Come on, buddy, let's go. Boris said to the lead. Gordon back to second. Oh, little contact there. 22-7, Robbie Gordon. Robbie's out of gas. It comes up short. Still a long way to go here. And is he going to get off the track in a safe spot or bring out another yellow?
How about that? Boris said, looking great. That 09 Zaxby's car.
Sorry, they want you to go in and cut off turn 7. Cut off turn 7.
Tell you what, if Boris wins this race, he's needed this for a long time. Here's another guy that's trained all these drivers.
Oh, there goes
Fitzpatrick off. He trained a lot of drivers. Boris said did.
Was running 5th, Fitzpatrick. Max Pappas trying to charge in, and that always present 32 car. Villeneuve in 3rd. Oh, listen to the Quebec fans cheer.
Max Pappas is going to get to Boris said.
Willie put a bumper to him. You never know.
There's Robbie Gordon and where he has parked his car. To the white flag. Last lap at Montreal. Even if the caution comes out, the race will be over, the field will be frozen. Pappas looking to close in. If they tangle, the 32 will try and pounce. Oh,
Watch the wheels up.
Bobble bounce in.
Well, it's close.
Oh, man, look at Villeneuve pushing hard.
Oh, inside for second. Villeneuve. Can he stay there? No. Pappas gets back by. Now Pappas has to try and chase Boris Said back down.
That's just what Boris Said needed. Let those guys race, let him get out of Dodge. And he pulls about 10 car lengths on him.
Turn 8 and turn 9. There's Robbie Gordon's car as the driver walks away.
Boris has got a good turn 10, Andy.
Yeah, he did a good job getting down in there. I was wondering if he was going to be able to get in there without wheel hopping. That's the key right there. I believe he can hold him off through these next 2 corners.
Remember, it was the last corner of the last lap last year. One little mistake that cost Marcus Ambrose the win and allowed Carl Edwards to go by. Here's Pappas inside of Boris.
He got him.
Boris going to try the crossover.
Clear.
Pappas over the curves. Here comes Boris Said. Drag racing to the finish line, side by side. Who's going to get here first? It is, I think, Boris Said. I think he got him by a bumper.
What everybody else had known, that Boris unfortunately did not, is that he in fact won. For the last 30 laps of the race, he had 0 radio contact. Being as close a finish it was, he wasn't sure if he had just edged him out for the W, choosing to stay out for the cool-down lap to see if Max would go down pit road, trying to avoid a 2007 Robbie Gordon-type smoke show affair. Max does duck on off, and the ecstatic Boris pulls up to victory lane. From here on out, I could continue to talk on and on about the more recent parts of his career, about how he'd fill in for other drivers in the mid-2010s at Sears Point or the Glen, the Greg Biffle debacle in 2011, or how he was a surprise entry in a couple of V8 Supercar events, or last year at Sonoma in the next-gen Cup car. But the fact is, his story doesn't actually end here. As the very weekend of writing this, me and a buddy of mine had watched Boris in a bright yellow Challenger posting the fastest lap in a Trans Am race, a race where his son was also racing. The old man hasn't lost a step, and he has still yet to get a haircut. So as much as I'd usually have some quote-unquote closing thoughts on the matter, he is still out there and being competitive. As such, I see myself coming back to talk about Boris in the near future. If and when he decides to retire, that is. Big if. The road course ringer that got a start by stealing a dump truck to run over mailboxes whilst crunching gears at 13 proved that you're never too old to start. Until next time, Boris, keep wheeling that thing. You're the man. Said head for life.
And the words out of Boris Said's mouth, finally, a winner in the Nationwide Series. What does this mean to you?
It's unbelievable. I mean, I've been trying so long, and this race is so tough, and it was all about brakes, and thanks to Performance Friction for giving me the best brakes in the thing, and it just was unbelievable. I didn't know I won because I didn't have a radio at the end, but you know, these guys did a great job. Performance Friction brake, Zaxby's thing, Zaxby's fried chicken, and it was just awesome.
What was it like racing Max Pappas there, coming to the checkers?
Well, he went in deep, and I thought, ooh, well, all right, I'm second, but it was good racing, really clean racing, good racing. Max is a great guy, and that's great for Robbie Benton and all the RAB crew.
You've said before that you felt a little bit guilty that you've given all your tricks to everybody else in the field. Certainly seems like you saved some tricks up your sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, we just really played it smart and, you know, saved our brakes at the end, and we had a good car at the end, and that's what it took.
Congratulations.
Thanks a lot.
Boris Said, a Nationwide Series winner, and as he said, finally.